First off, I was told to speak up, so hopefully you can hear me. And as an aside, I wanted to tell you that I am so thrilled to see Ryan Takeda. I haven't seen him in 10 years. He was doing his PhD at Stanford, and he would, on La Mamelle Artcom, the artist organization that I have been involved with and did the archives for. And he would drop by the library all the time. I mean, several times. We would spend hours talking, and I think he got all this dirt and side stories because, you know, the archives are formal at Stanford, and then he would get the real stories that went into the organization. Anyway, I'm so happy to see you. It's been so long. You're grown up and everything. So in the early 70s, there was a proliferation of artists making time-based performance. These were time-based actions done by visual artists, later referred to and labeled as performance art, but at the time, there was no such thing as performance art. They're ephemeral, they were investigative, they're works that explored language, sound, spectacle, personal, social, environmental issues, often with private or small audiences. I'm just trying to read my handwriting, I can't even read it. Anyway, there was a growing number of artist spaces that popped up in the 70s, the first being MoCA, Museum of Conceptual Art, in 1970, and then Bonnie Shirk's Farm in 1974. And the space that I was involved in first called itself La Mamelle, and we started out as a publisher in the summer of, the first issue was the summer of 1975. And then we changed our name later on, a few years later, to Artcom. There was also a lot of other spaces, 80 Langdon Street, 63 Bluxham Street, camera work gallery, etc. And these were all percolating and very excited and interesting. You know, a lot of interesting ideas were coming out of these spaces in the 70s. I thought I'd mention a few of my favorite pieces. One was the first event that MoCA sponsored in 1970 was called Sound Sculpture As, and Tom Marioni stepped up onto a ladder and pissed into a bucket, a metal bucket. And as the piss increased, the sound dropped, and that was his sound piece. And Paul Coase attached microphones to two 25-pound blocks of ice, and recorded the sound of ice melting. This was all very conceptual stuff, and it was really cool. Everyone's all excited about it. Bonnie Shirk did, as you've seen and heard, the Sitting Still series in 1970, and Public Lunch, which Ryan talked about in 71, and Portable Parks in 1970. These were all outdoor spaces, and she was very much part of that whole scene in the 70s. Another favorite piece of mine is Linda Montano handcuffed to Tom Marioni for 3 days in 1973 as an expression of living art, and it was a duration piece. They did have a 3-foot piece of rope between them, but they did everything together, sleep together, eat together, ride Muni together. I don't know if they took showers together. Another piece, Chris Burden, Through the Night Softly, 1973. He crawled through 50 feet of broken glass with hands tied behind his back on a street in Los Angeles. Terry Fox did Corner Push at Reese Paley Gallery. That's on the Book of Performance Anthology, the first edition. And I see that Chip Lord's here, so I thought I'd mention Ant Farm's Media Burn, which was done in 1975 outside. It was a dream car that plowed into a flaming wall of television sets as a performance. All of these are actually documented in this book. So there were lots of artist spaces that were created. I already mentioned MoCA, 63 Bluxom Farm, camera work. But I also want to say that there were institutions that were also supporting this activity, not as rigorously as the artist-run spaces, but Brenda Richardson at the Berkeley Art Museum, Tom Mariani before he left at the Richmond Art Center, DCZ Museum in Santa Clara, SF MoMA with its famous, really important space-time sound exhibition that took place December 79 to February 1980. So there was just a lot of activity going on. So how do we know about this stuff? How were these things documented? So many of them were individual pieces that just took place on the street that were investigative, but that really, they weren't showing like at a museum where people would come and view them. So the way that it was, the way they were captured were through film, through audio, through photographs, and through artist magazines. So there were there's a huge proliferation of artist magazines that were taking place during that time period. Avalanche and Art Rite in New York, High Performance in Los Angeles, La Mamelle magazine in San Francisco, and many, many more that were trying to capture artists speaking directly about their ideas. So there would be interviews, there would be pieces that they would submit of photographs of works that they did, etc. So this was all happening, and stuff was being collected. So the organization that I was involved in, La Mamelle, as I mentioned before, started in summer 1975 and opened a space, large space, in 1976. We had tons of performance, and I always said we were pack rats. We collected everything, ephemera, artist writings, images, audio, video. We had a large video archive, which we donated to Pacific Film Archive. We had eventually a huge 300 plus linear feet of archives that went to Stanford. It was just a way of trying to capture all this documentation that was happening at the time. And excuse me, I don't have slides. Just to mention a few of the journals. So we started out looking like a normal, magazine with this kind of shape. Then we started experimenting with form and type, and this is the issue for performance, the performance art issue, which, excuse me, was huge, and librarians hated this. As a librarian, all my librarian friends said, "Why are you doing this? We don't know how to handle this odd material." Then we decided we would try to be a little more normal, and we changed the name to ArtCom and published, Anna, 24 issues of ArtCom. And then in spring of 1986, Anna Cooey, who's in the audience, was very involved in moving the print journal to the Whole Earth Electronic link, and we became a digital-only journal starting very early, 86. There was no Whole Earth, there was no internet, or there was no Google. You couldn't Google anything. So how do you're gathering all this material, there's a huge interest in generating all this activity. How is it captured? How is it documented? Who's collecting it? Well, we tended to collect a ton of it at ArtCom. We had a huge space. I think Carl said that we rented it for 20 years at 1.5 cents per square foot. So that was a really good deal, even then. And we had students who wanted to intern and be part of the art scene. So we would have them come in and go through our mailbox and sort and file. So we had tons of artist files and artist periodicals from all over. So, I mentioned Avalanche and ArtRight, and there were all kinds of magazines, but none of these journals were indexed anywhere. So as a librarian, I was tasked when we decided to do this book. We have 4 essays. Linda Fry Burnham and Moira Roth wrote about Southern California performance. Carl Loeffler and Judith Berry wrote about Northern California performance. And I was tasked with doing the chronology of literature, which is like 360 pages. So during my time when I wasn't at the library working as a librarian, I was at San Francisco Public Library because they had Art Week bound, and in my library it was only on microfilm, which gave me a headache. So I would rush down to SFPL on the weekends and go through page by page. And I would go through page by page of all these artist magazines that we had, because none of it was indexed. Art Index and Humanities Index were the only 2 printed indexes that were attempting to gather up art information, but they only covered the main journals. None of this artist stuff. So we thought this would be valuable to put it together, and it covers, this first edition covers 1970 through 80 or 79. So it's 10 years worth of artist activities, including really bad images, I'm sorry to say. It was it was expensive to try to publish this. Images, black and white images, and then a documentation of all the different artists, not only things that were published in artists' magazines, but also artists were doing their own publications. They were writing artist books, they were creating ephemera, postcards, etc. And so we would get all that stuff sent to us in the mailbox to ArtCom, and we would catalog it all. And so a lot of that is accessible because of this book. And I have to brag because I don't know if any of you belong to academia.edu, but about once a week or more, I get a notice from them that someone in Poland or Budapest or Czech Republic has cited Performance Anthology. So somehow we did an incredible job of distribution. And the last time I was in Scandinavia, being a librarian, and now married to a library designer, architect, we go to all the libraries, and of course I check to see if my book's in it. And it is. So Helsinki, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Tallinn, they all have this book on California performance art from the 70s and 80s. It's really amazing, number one, that they'd be interested in it, and number two, that the distribution was good enough that they actually all bought it. So I was quite thrilled about that. What else was I going to talk about? Documentation. Putting together the book was really onerous, to say the least. And then I think that's about it. We as an organization, we went from making audio zines and video zines to working online. And the last thing that Carl Loeffler did, he left San Francisco and went to Carnegie Mellon and worked with graduate students to do a virtual reality program on Pompeii that went to the Guggenheim and to Dion Museum. And if he were still with us, I'm sure he would be totally into AI and ChatGPT and DALL-E and all the rest that's coming down the pike, because it's pretty exciting and scary and interesting. My only last statement is that what are we going to do about all the things that were born digital? I mean, everything I've been talking about was in some kind of tangible format, and then we were able to document it and put it into Stanford or Getty Museum or New York MoMA or SF MoMA into their archives. But what about all the stuff in the past 10 years, maybe, that had been born digital, and that someone has to deal with it, not me. I'm retired. So I worry about that. And how do you make sure that it's not only accessible, but that it's in good form, so that it portrays, what the original was about. Internet Archive does have an initiative, and Daniela knows about this, that they've put together it's called CARTA, a collaborative art archive. And they have funded many museum libraries throughout the country to digitize, to create a digital archive of their materials. And so far it's been mainly things like art auction catalogs. But they will eventually move to, I'm sure, digital, born digital materials. I just wanted to mention three, being a librarian, I'm sorry, I can't resist. Mention three documents or books that I think are seminal in documenting the 70s, 80s period of performance and artist-run spaces, etc. One is Suzanne Foley's, it's been mentioned a couple times already, Space-Time Sound, Conceptual Art in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 70s, and it was December 79 to February 80. And it includes a huge number of artists and their works, and I think it's a really important seminal document for that time period. Of course, I'm going to include my own book, which I think is also a really important document for covering this time period. And we did do an updated edition. I added 8 more years of documents, chronology of literature, to the 1989 edition. And then the other one that I don't think very many people know about, because I think it has had very poor distribution. I checked on WorldCat at one point, and very few libraries actually have it. And it's called Artist-Run Spaces. And I think it came out of Italy. It took several years to produce. Tom Marioni it included a piece, I did as well, about La Mamelle Artcom. There's also chapters on printed matter, Western Front, Franklin Furnace in New York, Art Pool in Budapest, Art Metropole in Toronto, Eckhart in Geneva. Anyway, I think it's a really useful document to kind of get a sense of artist-run spaces during this time period worldwide. And hopefully you can find it, because I think not many libraries bought this book. Okay, thank you.